My son-in-law's voice carried through the front door before I even touched the handle. "To the family that actually shows up," he said, and the room erupted in laughter. "And to the ones who can't be bothered, cheers to them being somewhere else for once." I stood on the porch with a pecan pie in my hands and my key still in my pocket. Through the narrow window beside the door, I could see the dining room, the amber light, the faces turned toward Derek at the head of the table, glasses raised. My daughter Laura was laughing with her whole body, the way she used to laugh as a little girl. I hadn't seen her laugh like that in years. I hadn't realized until that moment that I was the reason she'd stopped. I set the pie down on the porch railing. I took one long breath of the cold November air. Then I picked the pie back up, walked to my truck, put it on the passenger seat, and drove home. I want to tell you that I cried on the way back. I want to tell you that I called someone, that I pulled over, that I felt the ground shift beneath me the way it does when something enormous changes. But the truth is, I drove home in silence, heated up a bowl of soup I'd made the day before, and sat at my kitchen table watching the steam curl toward the ceiling. I felt something, but it wasn't grief, and it wasn't rage. It was the particular quiet of a man who has just understood something he should have understood a long time ago. Let me tell you who I am, so you understand what came before that porch. My name is Robert Harmon. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a structural engineer for a firm in Columbus, Ohio, and I retired 3 years ago with a pension, a paid-off house, and what I believed was a close relationship with my only child. My wife Carol passed away 11 years ago, 2 years after Laura's wedding. It was the kind of loss that reorganizes everything. What you spend your time on, what you spend your money on, what you think the word family means. After Carol died, Laura became the whole of that word for me. Her, and eventually her son Tyler, who was born 8 months after we buried his grandmother. Derek Calloway came into the picture 6 years before Tyler was born. He was 26 when Laura brought him home, confident in the way that some young men are confident before life has tested them properly. He sold insurance then. Later, he would manage a car dealership. Later still, he would decide he wanted to open his own auto repair business, which is where I come in, financially speaking. I didn't dislike Derek in the beginning. He was charming enough, and he made Laura happy. And after losing Carol, I would have approved of almost anyone who made my daughter smile. But there were moments, small ones, that I filed away without examining too closely. The way he spoke over Laura at dinner, the way he accepted my help, my money, my co-signatures, my quarterly deposits into their account without ever quite saying thank you. Not the real kind of thank you. Not the kind that costs something. Here is the accounting of what I gave them, because I think it matters. When Laura and Derek bought their first house in 2019, they were short on the down payment. I wrote a check for $40,000. I told Laura it was a gift, not a loan, because I didn't want money sitting between us like a debt. When Derek's dealership job fell through during the pandemic and they fell 3 months behind on their mortgage, I covered it $11,400 and told them not to worry about it. When Derek decided in 2022 that he wanted to open Callaway Auto, I co-signed a business loan for $85,000 and helped them negotiate the lease on the shop space. I did this because he was my son-in-law, and because Tyler needed stability, and because Carol always said that family holds family up. I believed that. I still believe it. What I misunderstood was whether it was mutual. The Thanksgiving invitation came from Laura in early November. She texted, not called. She'd been texting more and calling less for a couple of years by then, which I had also filed away. Dad, dinner at our place Thursday, 4 o'clock. Don't forget Tyler wants to show you his project. I told her I'd be there. I bought the ingredients for a pecan pie, Carol's recipe, the one Laura had loved since she was 7 years old. I left my house at 3:15. The drive should have taken 40 minutes. What I didn't account for was the accident on Route 40 that backed traffic up for nearly an hour. I called Laura at 4 to 10 to tell her I was running late. The call went to voicemail. I called again at 4:30. Same. I sent a text. Stuck in traffic on 40. Should be there by 5. Sorry, sweetheart. I don't know if she saw it before or after Derek's toast. I'm not sure it would have changed what happened either way. I arrived at their house at 4:53. The cars in the driveway told me Derek's brother and sister-in-law were there, along with a couple I vaguely recognized from the neighborhood. 8 or 9 people total, from what I could see through the window. Dinner had clearly started without me, which was fine. I understood. I wasn't annoyed about the food. I was only glad I'd made it. I heard Derek's voice before I heard the words clearly. The tone was festive, loud, the voice of a man performing for an audience he liked. Then, the words came into focus through the glass. "To the family that actually shows up," he said. "And to the ones who can't be bothered, cheers to them being somewhere else for once." Laughter. Laura's loudest. Then Derek's brother said something I couldn't make out fully, but I caught the words "old man" and "fashionably late," and the table laughed again. Then Derek, still projecting, still playing to the room. "You know what they say. Some people are the life of the party, and some people are just the ones who pay for it." More laughter. I heard Laura say, "Derek, stop," but she was still laughing when she said it. I stood on that porch for perhaps 30 seconds, long enough to understand that this was not a one-time remark, not a joke that had slipped out. It was a performance, comfortable and practiced, which meant it had an audience that had heard variations of it before, which meant this was how my son-in-law spoke about me when he believed I wasn't listening, which meant my daughter had heard it and decided that laughing was easier than stopping it. I put the pie on the railing. I breathed. I picked up the pie and walked to my truck. I drove home and ate soup and sat with the silence. I want to be careful here about what I tell you I felt, because I think accuracy matters more than drama. I was not devastated. I think I had been slowly, quietly devastated for years and hadn't permitted myself to name it. What happened on that porch was not a wound. It was the moment I finally looked at a wound I'd been walking around with and decided to stop pretending it wasn't there. I did not call Laura that night. I did not call her Friday. She called me Saturday morning and I let it go to voicemail. Her message was cheerful, slightly puzzled. "Dad, where'd you go? We saved you a plate. Tyler was asking about you. Call me when you get a chance." No mention of Derek's toast. No mention of having texted or called when I said I was stuck in traffic. Just the breezy assumption that everything was fine, because for her, it was. I called my attorney on Monday morning. His name is Gerald Hutchins, and he has handled my affairs for 14 years. I asked him to come to my office, my home office, where I still keep a desk even though I'm retired, because I've always thought more clearly at a desk, and I told him what I was planning to do. Gerald is a careful man. He asked me twice whether I was certain. I told him I was. He asked me whether I'd spoken to Laura. I told him I hadn't yet, and that I had reasons for that ordering, and he respected it. The first thing I did was remove Derek as co-borrower beneficiary on anything that named him. The business loan co-signature was more complicated. You can't simply unco-sign a loan, but Gerald walked me through my options, and I began exploring them. I also contacted the bank where I had set up the automatic monthly transfer that had been supplementing Laura and Derek's mortgage payment for the past 2 years. I stopped it. Quietly. No announcement. I wanted to give Derek the gift of discovering consequences without warning, the same way I'd discovered his opinion of me. The second thing I did was call Tyler. My grandson was 14 then, a serious kid who liked building model trains and reading history books that were too old for him. He called me Grandpa Bob, and he was the one person in that house I was certain had never once laughed at my expense. I didn't tell him what I was doing. I just told him I loved him and asked about his project, something about the Transcontinental Railroad, and listened to him talk for 40 minutes. When we hung up, I sat at my desk for a long time. The third thing I did 2 weeks after Thanksgiving was meet with Gerald again and begin revising my estate documents. I want to be plain about this. I have done reasonably well in my life. The house is paid off. The pension is solid. There are investments Carol and I built together over 30 years. I'm not wealthy in the way that makes news, but I have something worth leaving. And I had always assumed, without examining the assumption, that Laura would receive most of it. I changed that. I established a trust for Tyler, irrevocable, accessible to him at 25, with provisions for education before that. I endowed a scholarship at Ohio State in Carol's name for engineering students from low-income families. I made arrangements for a local food bank that Carol had volunteered at for 12 years before she got sick. What remained for Laura was considerably less than what she had expected, though still meaningful. I am her father, not her enemy, and I want that on the record. I told Gerald not to tell her. He told me he wasn't permitted to. I told him I knew that. I just wanted to say it out loud. Laura called 3 more times in December before the pattern changed. The 4th call was different, her voice tighter, the false lightness gone. "Dad, I need to talk to you. Can you just call me back?" I called her back that evening. "We got a notice from the bank," she said. "The automatic transfer stopped." "I know," I said. I stopped it. A pause. "What do you mean you stopped it? Why?" I told her I'd been doing some thinking about my finances. I told her I was making some changes. I kept my voice even, the way Gerald had advised me to keep it, not cold, not angry, just clear. Laura asked if everything was okay, and I said yes. And she asked if I was sick, and I said no. And she asked what was going on, and I said I would tell her when I was ready, and that I loved her, and I got off the phone. She called again 2 days later. Derek called once, which was the first time in memory that he'd called me directly. I let that one go. He didn't leave a message. The call that mattered came on a Tuesday evening in January. Laura called, and this time she didn't ask questions. She cried. Not the performed kind of crying that asks for something, but the real kind. The kind that means a person has finally looked at a thing squarely. She said she knew I had heard Derek at Thanksgiving. She said she'd figured it out on her own. The timeline of the missed calls. The pie that wasn't on the porch when she checked later. My silence afterward. She said she was sorry. She said she should have stopped it. She said she had wanted to stop it and hadn't, and that she had known for a long time that Derek talked that way sometimes, and she had told herself it was just blowing off steam, and she hadn't been honest with herself about what it meant that she'd let him. I let her talk. I didn't fill the silences with reassurance the way I would have a year ago. I just listened. When she finished, I said, "Laura, I love you. I will always love you. But I need you to understand something. I spent a long time making myself easy to dismiss. I paid for things and asked for nothing and told myself that was what good fathers do. And maybe it is. But it also allowed Derek to believe that the things I contributed had no weight, that I had no weight. And you let him believe that, which means on some level you believed it too." She didn't argue with me. She said, "I know." I said, "I'm not going anywhere, but things are going to be different." She asked what I meant. I told her about the transfer. I told her I was reviewing my other financial arrangements as well. I did not tell her about the will. Not then. I said I needed some time, and that I wanted her to have some time too, and that whatever this was, it wasn't the end of us. She said, "What about Derek?" I said, "Derek is your husband. What happens with Derek is between you and Derek. I'm talking about me and you." Callaway Auto started having trouble in February. I don't take pleasure in saying this, but I won't pretend it didn't happen. With my co-signature in jeopardy, Gerald had found a legal path. A technical default clause Derek had triggered by missing one quarterly reporting requirement. The lender began paying closer attention to the loan. Derek had also, apparently, been drawing from the business account in ways that made the books look worse than he'd told Laura. I learned this from Laura, who called me in March and sounded like someone who'd been awake for several nights in a row. "I didn't know how bad it was," she said. "I believe you," I said. "He told me the business was doing fine. He said we just needed to get through the first 2 years. Businesses often do need time," I said, "but they also need honest bookkeeping." She asked if I could help. I told her I needed to think about it. That was the most honest answer I had. Here is what I told Gerald, and what I eventually told Laura. I would not let Tyler's stability become a casualty of this. If the house was genuinely at risk, their own mortgage, not one I was supporting, I would find a way to protect Tyler's situation. Not Derek's business. Not Derek's pride. Tyler's stability. Gerald helped me structure a small, direct arrangement. Not a loan to Derek, but a specific fund tied to Tyler's housing and school needs, administered through the trust. Derek couldn't access it. It wasn't his to mismanage. What it did was make sure my grandson could sleep in his own room and go to his school regardless of what his father's business did next. Derek did not thank me for this. He told Laura it was humiliating and controlling. Laura told me what he'd said, and I told her I understood why he felt that way, and that I wasn't doing it for Derek. Tyler called me in April. He said, "Grandpa Bob, Mom cries a lot now." I told him I knew, and that it wasn't his fault, and that some hard things were happening that the adults were working through, and that he could always call me. He said, "I know. I just wanted you to know that I'm glad you still come over." I had been coming over Sunday afternoons, sitting with Tyler, helping him with his railroad project, eating whatever Laura put on the table, and speaking to Derek with ordinary courtesy when he was present, which was less often than before. It wasn't a war. I want to be clear about that. I didn't set out to destroy my son-in-law, and I didn't. What I did was stop making myself easy to disregard, and that had consequences I hadn't engineered. Derek's business problems were his own. His choices with the books were his own. My removing the financial cushion that had made those choices feel consequence-free, that was mine. But there's a difference between withdrawing a gift and delivering a punishment. And I knew which one I'd done, even if Derek didn't. By summer, Laura had retained her own attorney. She and Derek were not divorced as of the last time we spoke, in full honesty. They were still working things out. I don't know what that means for them going forward, and I've told Laura that whatever she decides, I'm her father, and that's permanent. I also told her that I hoped she was making decisions based on what was true and not what was convenient, and she told me she'd heard me, and I believed her. What I can tell you is what my own life looks like now. I had the kitchen repainted in the color Carol always wanted, a soft sage green that I used to think was too much and now think is exactly right. I joined a Saturday hiking group at the state park, which I'd been meaning to do for 3 years. I drive up to see Tyler every Sunday, and we spend 2 hours on the railroad, which now stretches across most of a folding table in his room and includes a replica of the Promontory Summit site that Tyler researched himself and I am genuinely proud of. On the way home, I stop at the food bank where Carol used to volunteer, and I help sort donations for an hour. And the woman who runs it knows Carol's story now, and sometimes she calls me just to check in. Gerald finalized the estate revisions in September. I didn't tell Laura until October, on a Sunday after Tyler had gone to do homework. I sat with her at her kitchen table, a table I had helped them pick out, which I noticed without saying, and I told her what I'd done and why. I told her about Tyler's trust. I told her about Carol's scholarship. I told her about the food bank endowment. I told her that what remained for her was less than she had probably expected, and that I needed her to understand it wasn't a punishment, it was an honest reflection of what I wanted my life to mean. She cried again. This time, I put my hand over hers on the table. "I'm not doing this to hurt you," I said. "I know," she said. "I know, Dad. Your mother would have done the same thing," I said. "She just would have said it with more grace than I did." Laura laughed a little at that, through the crying. It was the first time I'd heard her laugh since before Thanksgiving of the year before, and this time I was in the room. Tyler's railroad is almost finished. He says the last piece he needs is a specific bridge component that's back-ordered from a manufacturer in Pennsylvania, and when it comes in, he wants me there the day he puts it in place. I told him I wouldn't miss it. I keep Carol's photograph on my desk. There's one from early in our marriage. She's standing in front of the house we hadn't bought yet, but we're about to, squinting in the sun, smiling at something I said. I don't remember what I said. I remember that she looked at me like I was worth listening to. I've thought a lot, in the months since that Thanksgiving porch, about what it means to love someone without making yourself small on their behalf. Carol knew how to do that. She could love you completely and still hold her ground, still require something from you, still make clear that her dignity was not negotiable. I had spent the years after losing her confusing generosity with self-erasure. I thought that giving without condition meant giving without limit, and I thought that asking nothing meant I had no needs. And neither of those things was true. Derek Calloway told his dinner party that some people are the life of the party, and some people are just the ones who pay for it. He wasn't wrong that I had been paying. What he missed was that payment isn't the same as worth, and that the person who signs the check decides when to close the account. I am 64 years old. I have a paid-off house with a sage green kitchen. I have a grandson who is building the most technically accurate model of the transcontinental railroad I have ever seen. I have a daughter who is, slowly and painfully and honestly, learning something that it took me too long to learn myself. I have Saturday mornings in the woods and Sunday afternoons building bridges, and Tuesday evenings sorting canned goods in Carol's name. I don't need anyone to raise a glass to me. I already know what I'm worth.